There's a chapter I want to talk about where you mention how your first contract was negotiated at Live, and then years later, all of the media swirl surrounding Regis retiring. And I think the thread throughout both of those situations was that you took the high road and you stayed silent and you thought this will make the situation better. But ultimately that allows other people to tell your side of the story for you. And I think that is a common feeling for women in a lot of industries. So what did you learn from that experience early in your career, and how do you feel like you've evolved in that way? Have you been able to set the record straight?
I hope this book helps reframe that narrative. I didn't write it casually at all. I put a lot of thought into it because I want to remain respectful and reverent of our professional relationship. But, I have worked with hundreds of people over the course of my career, thousands, really, if you consider crew members and different television shows. I had a sitcom on ABC, a game show, a talk show, the soap opera. I've done a lot. I run a production company, and I understand workplace friendships and relationships and nuances. And we didn't have that. And we didn't have to have that. That's not on me. There's a lot of talk about power dynamic now. That wasn't a phrase then, but there's pervasive narrative developed. And I want to be clear, he did not retire. He just left our show. He went on and did another show. He did a couple of other shows, but he left our show, and that was his decision, certainly not mine, and certainly not the show's. That was his choice. But there was this pervasive, endless narrative that somehow I, alone, never spoke to him again, cut off communication, and that was my fault because I was an ingrate. I was an ungrateful friend, an ungrateful employee, an ungrateful whatever. And that's not the truth. And that's what I set out to correct in the book on record. And I use sort of the evidence that was out there all along that people chose to either ignore or not write about or not speak about, because it's a much sexier, clicky story, isn't it? If the woman is somehow the evil villain and, it's just a way clickier story. And it's just not, it's a great story. It's just not true. And I kept saying it behind the scenes the whole time. I go, it's a great story. It's not true, but it's a really unique story. But again, it's one of these things where I think to myself, it does in fact take two to tango, and that means two, not one. And I don't know if anybody else in the world keeps in contact with every single person they have ever worked with. I have long-term friendships. I have best friends that go back for 50 years. I have best friends that go back 30 years. I have friends from every single place I've worked, very close friends for decades and decades. And yet nobody has ever asked me about them.
Yeah. You say it's not a self-help book, but that you can find some help in it. And I think that is really true for working women, particularly in the entertainment industry. So if women are reading this book and looking to it for some advice, what would you have done differently in that situation? Because I think a lot of women sort of sit there and think, okay, if I just don't say anything, I will be painted as the nice person. I should just do that. But, looking to you who has been through something like this, what do you wish you would have said?
I wish I would have corrected the narrative in real time, because I just kept thinking, well, there's clear evidence that none of this is true. So it will get fixed. It will get fixed. I was so desperate to not advance that narrative that was sort of spiraling and going viral out there, even though viral wasn't really a thing yet, but it was our version of viral. And I kept waiting for somebody to maybe even bother to pick up a phone and ask me for a comment. But that never happened. It was a very unusual circumstance where this was said and it was believed with a ferocity that it was surprising and terrifying and shocking at how willing people were to believe, oh, she's the problem.